Shri maNipūra Shakti candraghanTāyai Namaha. Shri maNipūra Shakti candraghanTāyai Namaha. Shri maNipūra Shakti candraghanTāyai Namaha. Jai Hind, folks. Jai Shri Candraghanṭā Mata. Welcome to the third night of Nava-rātri 2021. As a symbol of the third night, we have 3 lamps over here. Even more importantly, we are at the third chakra, which is the chakra of fire. And amongst the avatars of Vishnu, after Matsya and Kurma at the Swadhisthana and going in the reverse direction to Varaha at the Muladhara, we jump back to the maNipūra chakra, which is the avatar of Narasimha that you see over here. Quite bloody. And candraghanTā essentially begins such a rampage. Unlike Shailaputri at the Muladhara and Brahmacharini at the Swadhisthana, who are essentially symbolized with 2 hands, candraghanTā here is symbolized with 10 hands. But if you look at those 10 hands, not all 10 hold weapons. Only 5 of them hold weapons. With one pair, she does the Abhayavarada mudras, that is, blessings and removal of fear. And with the other 2, she holds the same things which Brahmacharini did, namely the Rudrakshamala and the Kamandala that you saw yesterday in place of these lamps. So there's a transition that is taking place as the Rajas tries to peak. Remember, at the Muladhara, we had said goodbye to tamas or lethargy in lieu of passion. So we are developing that passion gradually, and it's turned into half of passion and half of aggression at the maNipūra chakra, which is symbolized by half the 10 hands of candraghanTā holding weapons and the other half holding either the mudras, the rudraksha, the kamandala, and a lotus for dispassion. Passion, dispassion. Because the next step, which we shall see tomorrow night, is transcending Rajas. Because only 3 chakras are associated with Rajas. We transcend them to the 3 chakras of Sattva and eventually Trigunatita, the other 3 chakras. Unfortunately, many people, even some holy men, so-called religious teachers, categorize these 3 nights as tamas, rajas and sattva. No. It's only after we have crossed over lethargy, laziness or tamas that we can enter into this spiritual realm. So the very first 3 nights are actually rajas, the next 3 are sattva, and the last 3 are trigunatita, to transcend all the 3 gunas. So we shall, of course, look into them in detail. I just wanted to give you a glimpse of what we have in store. Coming back to the maNipūra, Mani means a gem or something which is precious, and Pura means which is a city, but essentially that which is already well established. We saw Swadhisthana is self-establishment. That is, Brahmacharini took the path of sadhana in order to achieve a certain goal, which she begins to realize at the maNipūra chakra as candra-ghanTā. So, maNipūra is essentially a city of jewels, but actually it's an establishment of jewels. Pura is also the same root word for Purana, or that which is old and which is renewed every now and then. And what we are talking about as the gems over here, or the enemies against which weapons have to be used, are all internal, because this is an entirely internal process. This yogic process, this tantric process that we are doing through the navarātri is essentially an internal process. And whether it is friends or enemies, they're all in the interiority of us. Kama Krodha we saw yesterday, Mada Moha Matsarya we see today. And Moha is essentially that attachment, and attachment to this manis and the Pura, that is the city of lands, the desire for a home of our own, lands of our own, or for jewels of our own, or other kinds of material possessions. And candra-ghanTā happens to be auspicious on the day of the Tritiya, or what in Tamil is called as the Mundram Pirai, after the Mahalya Amavasya. The third day after every new moon is a Mundram Pirai or a Tritiya in the Shukla Paksha, or the waxing phase of the moon. Similarly, there is a Tritiya in the waning phase of the moon as well. But during the waxing phase, we see that on the first 2 days of Pratipad, which is associated with the Mooladhara, and Dvitiya, which is associated with the Swadhisthana, the moon is hardly visible. It's almost like Amavasya itself, the first 2 days after Amavasya, or the first 2 nights after Amavasya. You can hardly recognize the moon, even if it's not very cloudy. But on the third day, it appears as a beautiful sliver. That's what we call as the crescent moon. And that is what candra-ghanTā means. Ghanta, as many of you know, is the bell. And what we are talking about is not this symbolism of the bell itself, but of Chandra in the form of a ghanta. That is, in the shape of a bell. The bell has a hollow within itself, right? So that hollow, along with the border, essentially forms a crescent, and therefore a moon in the shape of a crescent or a bell is what is candra-ghanTā. And what is so special about this, Chandra refers to our essentially mind and the emotions that are associated with the mind, the watery mind. And that watery mind has crossed over the kapha nature of the earth at the Mooladhara as Shailaputri, and the water nature of the Swadhisthana as well. And these two together are that kapha, and when kapha is overcome and purified, it becomes ojas, and that's what we have brought to this stage of the maNipūra chakra, which is a fire, which refines that kapha that we had into ojas, but itself is having a potential of pitta, which when refined can transform into tejas. So this is candra-ghanTā, who is very different and distinct from the other two that we have seen. The one which flows from the mountain as a river, Shailaputri, becomes the water at the Swadhisthana chakra. So born out of the earth and becoming water, and now that water transforming into energy. You know how we generate most of our electricity, apart from thermal plants, is through hydroelectricity, through waterfalls which drive a motor, and the magnetic field there essentially results in an electric field, and that is how electricity is generated and utilized, and that's a form of energy. So you see how the mountain has led, which is basically the earth element, has led to the river, which is essentially the water element, which is led to this electricity or power, which is essentially the fire element or the energy element, solid, liquid, and energy. So this transition is what we are encountering here, and similar to the Narasimha avatar, also attributed to the maNipūra chakra, and Ayyappa, born out of Rudra, and Vishnu in the form of Mohini, essentially a purely masculine principle, and candra-ghanTā is having that kind of masculinity in a feminine body. And she's very different, not only in the fact that she has 10 hands compared to the 2 hands each of both Shailaputri as well as Brahmacharini, in the sense that Shailaputri used the vehicle of a bull, Nandi. She's Nandi-rudhana. Whereas Brahmacharini walked on her own feet. That is Swadhisthana, establishing yourself all by yourself. And now there's a transition into a more sophisticated vehicle. Sometimes she's known to be Vyagra-rudhini, that is riding a tiger, sometimes as Simha-rudhini, riding a lion, and sometimes as Garuda-rudhini, riding an eagle. Essentially, all three are capable of far more than just transport. So now the question of movement is not only to move from point A to point B, but also to aid in a war. And this war is against attachment. Now, those of you who are into Devi Upasana in the form of Sri Vidya, Sri Chakra, and things like that are familiar with Adi Shankaracharya's Saundarya Lahari, in which, very interestingly, throughout the references in the Saundarya Lahari, unlike the other books, scriptures on chakras and the kundalini, there is a reversal between the water and the fire elements. In other words, according to Adi Shankaracharya's Saundarya Lahari, the fire element occurs at the Swadhisthana and the water element at the maNipūra. Now, there's no conflict over here actually. What actually happens is, as a brahmachari and as a sannyasi, when we sublimate our sexual urges, which are essentially driven by nature because of its need to reproduce, once that is quenched and we give rise to a fire at the belly, that is one way of doing sadhana. The other way of doing sadhana is to entirely go all out with that reproductive urge as a fire and quench the hunger. Because the Swadhisthana is associated with the reproductive system in a physical body, in a conformal mapping, whereas the maNipūra is associated with the digestive system, amongst other things. Mainly the digestive system as the digestive fire. So Swadhisthana is associated with fluids such as reproductive fluids such as the semen, and taste, which is essentially the saliva, and essentially water elements. But when we control as a sannyasi or a brahmachari those sexual urges, nature-driven urges for reproduction, then the fire element and the water element get interchanged. But for those of us in family life, this is a natural progression from the age of reproduction and sexual urges eventually to dharma. And so, while at the Mooladhara, we saw the last use of smell or fragrance. And we, in order to move from the Mooladhara to the Swadhisthana, to transform from Shailaputri to Brahmacharini, we had to give up the sense of smell. Now, to move up from the Swadhisthana to the maNipūra, that is to transform from being a Brahmacharini to being candraghanTā ourselves, we need to give up the next sense of taste as well. So smell and taste are associated with kapha or ojas, and we give that up and come to pitta, which is essentially in a refined form tejas. Now the dominant amongst the three remaining senses is sight, because we can see a fire. So it is sight that is essentially associated with it. And so those of us who have been able to master the maNipūra chakra, our eyes burn with fire. And it's very difficult for other people to see into our eyes. One of the reasons why my hairstyle is getting modified into this is to not let people see that fire and get too disturbed in their minds, which is the reason why even during video shoots I try to keep my eyes half closed or cover it up with my hairs in the front, or munkudumi as we call it. So the digestion, once it is taken care of in the physical body, it takes care of most ailments, because more often than not, the internally generated ailments all originate at the stomach. So if your stomach is taken care of properly, or in other words, you have mastery over your maNipūra chakra, diseases are passing. And I've told you, in the last 3-4 decades, I've never had a need to visit any hospital or a doctor, or even pop a medicine for that matter directly from the pharmacy either. What is the reason? Once you have mastery over the maNipūra chakra, health is for granted. Of course, the body is going to age and it would have its pains and things like that, but this spiritual journey helps us from being away from suffering. There's no need to suffer anymore, because what we are into is a knowledge that suffering is optional, even though pain may be inevitable. So that is what candra-ghanTā is all about. Difference in the number of hands, because more action is required, more rajas, more passion, and the need to get rid of moha mada matsarya, because this attachment is essentially created by proximity to the objects. Not that we didn't have desires at the Swadhisthana. In fact, that is the seat of desires. We already talked about it, kama, ka-ama, that is unripe or raw happiness, and krodha, which is an obstruction to happiness, ka-rodha, ka-happiness, rodha, stop. Now, there what we were doing in Swadhisthana is just enjoying the pleasures without bothering about where the pleasure came from, whether it was a thing or a person or a situation. We didn't care. We just utilized all those situations, things and people to enjoy the pleasure if we were operating on the negative side of the Swadhisthana. But once we come to maNipūra, what happens is that gets transformed into moha or attachment. That is, we get attached to those objects of pleasure, or to the persons who are giving us pleasure, or to the situations which are giving pleasure to us. So we want them to be in proximity. And once that is there, just like when kama is there, and whenever it's not satisfied, you get krodha. Similarly, whenever attachment is there, and your about to lose that object of attachment or person of attachment or situation of attachment, you get fear. So fear is essentially again centered over here. But once you have a mastery over all of these three chakras up to the maNipūra, all of these are of the past. Again, jealousy is said to be a fire in the belly. Vaitherichal, we call it in Tamil, which is essentially a fire in the belly, which can be either positive to do some creative, positive activity, or it can be used to be jealous about other people. And so, this proximity to the objects of our attraction and attachment to them in the form of moha and the jealousy which results when not having it, or fear which results, bhaya or matsarya, which is jealousy, all of these can be negated by having a mastery over the maNipūra chakra. And that's where we don't pray to candra-ghanTā, we don't pray to Narasimha, because that creates a distance between us and these wonderful concepts which have been present to us. But we become Ayyappa, we ourselves become candra-ghanTā, we ourselves become Narasimha. Then we are able to awaken those latent potentials which are sleeping within us. And then there is a possibility for transformation. And these are the wonderful things. I can go on and on, but many people have requested that they are unable to handle very long videos. So I'm trying to keep this sweet, simple and short to give you the very essence of what is needed. And there will be many other occasions when we will revisit the maNipūra chakra as well as candra-ghanTā that we are. Aum Shri Candraghantāyai Namaha. Aum Shri maNipūra Shaktyai Namo Namaha. Swami Sharanamayappa. Aum Vajranakaya Vidmahe Tīkshnadaghashtraya Dhīmahi Tanno Narasimha Prachodayat. Wish you an even more vibrant third night of this series of 9 nights of Navaratri, in which we are celebrating our feminine nature, irrespective of whether we are male or female in terms of the physical body. Namaskar. Jai Hind. Namaskar. Jai Hind. Namaskar. Jai Hind.